Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gripe, the show for short, sweet reviews of new release movies, plus the one thing that annoyed me the most. And today we're going to be talking about The Boss. Melissa McCarthy movies seem to be about a dime a dozen anymore, so she's just cranking them out there. And The Boss is one of those. It's certainly not I don't know if you could call any of her movies prestige movies, but I'd say pretty much anything she does with Paul Feig has at least the potential to be somewhat decent. Bridesmaids, Spy, The Heat. Not necessarily great movies by any stretch, but certainly entertaining and fun. And Melissa McCarthy is kind of front and center in most of those movies. But then she's had some of these other movies that she's come out with, like, Tammy or The Identity Thief. And now basically you have The Boss. So basic plot of this movie is it's about a woman who was an orphan, and when she was, a child, she went with a few different families, and pretty much every time she went with a family, they sent her right back. So she never really had that family experience, and it kind of made her cold and hard. So when she grew up, she became this hardcore business person, and became this magnate for like attention and like of being this business savvy person of you could succeed too, like she did. So, she basically is very powerful, rich, all that, opulent, and her assistant, played by Kristen Bell, is, this single mother who is, just kind of trying to keep her somewhat grounded as much as she can. But she also has this rivalry with another extremely wealthy, eccentric businessman played by Peter Dinklage. And, in one of her fits of just, look at me sort of situation, she ends up, giving Peter Dinklage enough ammunition to call the SEC on her and shut her down for insider trading. So, she goes to jail. When she gets out, though, she has nothing. So she ends up leaning on Kristen Bell's character, who has a new job and doesn't really like her at all, but kind of leans on her to help her get back on her feet. And when she's in this situation, she goes with Kristen Bell's daughter to a dandelion, I think. I don't remember. But basically to this kind of like Girl Scout type of event. And there she gets the idea to kind of create a brownie empire because Kristen Bell is good at making brownies. And they start to build this, empire of, kind of this Girl Scouts where the girls actually get to keep the money sort of thing. And, she starts to build herself up again. And, you can kind of see that she's also starting to, kind of come down to earth a little bit and start to actually have some compassion for other people. But then she gets this sort of misconception that Kristen Bell is going to betray her, so she ends up selling off the company to Peter Dinklage's character. But, it was all a misunderstanding, so they decide they're going to break into his building and get the contract and destroy it before it goes into effect on Monday. And they do just that, and Peter Dinklage shows up. There's a big confrontation, at the end of which you realize, well, it's just him and Melissa McCarthy just want to get back together again, kind of thing. And, they, get the company back and save the day, and Kristen Bell goes out with a boyfriend, and everyone lives happily ever after. Yeah, if the plot seems kind of silly, it is. And if it doesn't really feel like there's a whole point to it, there isn't. This movie was a disappointment in a lot of ways. I'm not the biggest Melissa McCarthy fan. I enjoy movies she did. I mean, like, I love Bridesmaids and I love The Heat as just like, nonsense entertainment. But again, some of that help comes from, Melissa McCarthy and whoever she's starring with, whether it's Kristen Wiig or Sandra Bullock or, Jason Statham. I mean, she plays really well off of other strong actors. Whereas in this movie, not saying Kristen Bell isn't a strong actress, but it's meant to be the focus is entirely on her, and it just doesn't work. It's one of these kind of like Ben Falcone directed ode to my wife type of movies like Tammy was, which doesn't turn out well. In fact, it turns out pretty horribly. And there's a number of things about this movie that worried me from the start because, the trailers showed a number of, funny moments. And a lot of those moments didn't actually end up in the movie, which tells me either A, it was made just for the trailer and they were kind of testing the water, or they tested it with a, test audience, and they didn't react to it well. But what worried me was when they actually, like, in the movie itself, there are a lot of these places where you'd expect to see a joke or you expect something to happen, and there's nothing there. Or they have a joke that lands extremely flat. And there's a point where you're just like, you get kind of uncomfortable. It's like, well, is this supposed to be a comedy? Am I supposed to be laughing? Or was that an attempt at a joke? So it really was just a very uncomfortable movie in that regard, but that's also because it just wasn't that funny. You can only feed off of Melissa McCarthy's energy so much before you kind of need somebody else to kind of to take some of that away. And Kristen Bell, God love her, she just could not do that because it was meant to be it was meant to be Melissa McCarthy's movie. I mean, there's a few moments where Peter Dinklage kind of he steals it a little bit, but for the most part, it really was not. It just isn't funny. And that's not to say that they didn't try, because they did. It just didn't feel like they tried very hard, or maybe what they had originally wanted, people didn't react very well to, so they went back and made it a little bit safer. But by making it safer, it made it less funny. So, I mean, to give a key gripe to this movie, there's a ton that I could give key gripes to this movie, because I mean, it really just is a disappointment of a movie all around. It just does not have, I mean, it doesn't have the sort of opportunity for wit that a movie like Spy had. Like Spy, I was unexpectedly pleased with how that movie turned out, because I mean, they gave a lot of opportunities for interesting humor, which in this movie, that just seemed like they played it way too safe, and it was relying totally upon Melissa McCarthy's ability to make, crude jokes, which she's good at. I'm not one of these people who thinks, well, I just don't like her because she makes dirty jokes. That's a silly reason, because obviously in movies like Bridesmaids, it works. Like I quote some of her stuff from Bridesmaids all the time because it was good stuff. But here, they didn't really go off on a limb anywhere. There's that scene, which actually, I mean, it was in the trailer anyway, where her brownie scouts versus the dandelion scouts, they get into this big fight in the streets, and it at the end of that fight, it's kind of that ridiculous slapstick comedy that you would expect from something like Anchorman. But this movie is actually trying to be somewhat grounded, and that actually, to be perfectly honest, it's one of those things that it hurts a movie like this more than it helps, because if they had just kind of you know, kept one consistent type of comedy that they were trying to do, then it might have worked out a little better. But in this case, it really did not. So, what is my key gripe for The Boss? Because there really are a lot of gripes I had with this movie. I think the key gripe that I really the thing that kind of bugged me the most, because there's just a lot, there really is a lot about this movie that bothered me. It was that the story really. There's a scene where Melissa McCarthy is, she opened up a new like brownie thing, a new kitchen for where they can do their brownies and all that. And she just happens to look out the window, and Peter Dinklage is there talking to Kristen Bell, and immediately she just says, "Okay, I'm gonna do all this, or I'm gonna get mad at Kristen Bell, then I'm gonna sell the company and do all this." Like, it's just this immediate thing, and I know that this happens in a lot of these movies with very simple plots, where it's like, "Oh, I didn't know you were just talking to him, or you turned down any offer that he made, or anything like that." But she just immediately turned it. It's such a convenient plot point, and it things like that bug me. It's not just this movie, but any movie that does that. But this one really got to me, where it's like, okay, you could have just asked her and completely ignored this whole situation, but instead, she just assumed it, sold the company, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna move on, no problem. It was just so abrupt, and to me, it was lazy. It was really lazy. But in a movie like this, there's tons of laziness. Now, to be fair, there are some good stuff. I mean, I obviously laughed at a few things. But for the most part, I mean, even with Peter Dinklage, even with Kristen Bell, and some of the other comedy that came out of this movie, it really just it lands flat so often. I mean, they wasted Kristen Shaw. They I don't even know the name of the guy who they cast as Kristen Bell's boyfriend because he was kind of an everyman. You could have put any white guy into that role and he probably would have fit. You put anybody into that role. You could have put a plant and it probably would have fit. It there wasn't the whole movie just felt flat. It felt like they tried some things and they didn't work, so they just played it safe, and safe was lame. Safe was really lame. So my review of The Boss, my rating, I would give it a 4 out of 10. Pretty low. I mean, I enjoyed parts of it, but overall, it was not a good movie. It was not. It really just was a flat and unfunny movie. So, unfortunate, but sometimes you get an egg. It's the way it goes. So, that's my review of The Boss, and thanks for watching. See you next time.